The institutions of national government. Just like most other countries of the world today, the British government has three branches of government and a bureaucracy. Furthermore, the legislature is divided into two houses, a model that the British invented and is now widely copied. However, their system is parliamentary, and the interactions among the branches are very different from those in a presidential system, such as in the United States. In a parliamentary system, the executive branch is fused with the legislative branch because the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are actually the leaders of Parliament. As a result, separation of powers, a major principle of American government, does not exist. Also, the judicial branch lacks the power of judicial review, so it has no role in interpreting the Constitution of the Crown. Britain is a unitary state with political authority centralized in London. Decisions made by the central government, both laws passed by Parliament and regulations prepared by the bureaucrats in Whitehall, are binding on all public agencies. The Cabinet and the Prime Minister. The Cabinet consists of the Prime Minister and ministers, each of which heads a major bureaucracy of the government. Unlike the US Cabinet, the British Cabinet members are party leaders from Parliament chosen by the Prime Minister. The collective cabinet is the center of policy making in the British political system, and the Prime Minister has the responsibility of shaping decisions into policy. The cabinet does not vote, and all members publicly support the Prime Minister's decisions. In other words, as the leaders of the majority party elected by the people, they take collective responsibility for making policy for the country. The unity of the cabinet is extremely important for the stability of the government. The Prime Minister is the first among equals, but she or he stands at the apex of the unitary government. Despite many recent changes, political authority in Britain is still centralized in the London-based government. The Prime Minister is not directly elected by the people, but is a member of Parliament and the leader of the majority party. In 2010, no majority party emerged from the election, so a coalition government formed with David Cameron, the Conservative leader, as Prime Minister, and Nick Clegg, the Liberal Democrat leader, as Deputy Prime Minister. Since the system is designed to work with a clear majority party, the coalition cabinet had to incorporate the points of view of both parties in the coalition, and the Labour and minor parties were left as the loyal opposition. After the Conservative Party regained the majority in 2015, the system returned to normal. The Prime Minister speaks legitimately for all members of Parliament, chooses cabinet ministers in important subordinate posts, makes decisions in the cabinet with the agreement of the ministers, and campaigns for and represents the party in parliamentary elections. Parliament. Although the British government consists of three branches, little separation of power exists between the cabinet and Parliament. Like most other parliamentary systems, the executive and legislative branches are fused, largely because the leaders of the majority party in Parliament are also cabinet members. The House of Commons. Even though Britain has multiple political parties, the House of Commons is based on the assumption that one party will get the majority number of seats, and another will serve as the opposition. One way to look at it is that Britain has a multi-party system at the polls, but a two-party system in the House of Commons. Whichever party wins a plurality at the polls becomes the majority party, and the second party becomes the loyal opposition. Setup of the House of Commons. The House of Commons is set up with long benches facing one another with a table in between that is by tradition 2 sword lengths wide. The Prime Minister, who is elected as an MP like all the rest, sits on the front bench of the majority side in the middle. He or she becomes Prime Minister because the members of the majority party have made that selection. The majority party members may vote to change their leader, and the Prime Minister will change as a result. Right across from the Prime Minister sits the leader of the opposition party, whose members sit on benches facing the majority party. Between them is the table. Cabinet members sit in the front rows on the majority side, and the shadow cabinet faces them on the opposite side. On the back benches sit less influential MPs, the backbenchers, and MPs from other political parties sit on the opposition side, but at the end, far away from the table. Debate. The government, then, consists of the MPs on the first rows of the majority party side, and they are the most important policymakers as long as they hold power. Debate in the House is usually quite spirited, especially once a week during question time. During the hour, the Prime Minister and his cabinet must defend themselves against attack from the opposition, and sometimes from members of their own party. The Speaker of the House presides over the debates. Unlike the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, the Speaker is supposed to be objective and often is not a member of the majority party. The Speaker's job is to allow all to speak, but not let things get out of hand. She or he often has to gavel MPs down that get too rowdy. One reason the debate can get so intense is that the floor of Parliament is the place where MPs gain attention from others, possibly casting themselves as future leaders. Also, the opposition is seen as the check on the majority party, since checks and balances between branches do not exist. Because the majority party, in essence, is the government, party discipline is very important. If party members do not support their leadership, the government may fall into crisis because it lacks legitimacy. Above all, the majority party wants to avoid losing a vote of no confidence, a vote on a key issue. If the issue is not supported, the cabinet by tradition must resign immediately and elections for new MPs must be held as soon as possible. This drastic measure is usually avoided by settling policy differences within the majority party membership. If a party loses a vote of no confidence, all MPs lose their jobs, so there is plenty of motivation to vote the party line. A vote of no confidence occurred in early 2005 when the Labour government's higher education bill squeaked by with an approval vote of 316 to 311. The bill proposed raising university fees, a measure criticized by not only the opposition but also by some outspoken Labour MPs. The vote narrowly allowed Blair's government to continue to control Commons. The policymaking power of the House is very limited, since many government decisions are ratified by the Cabinet and never go to Parliament. Since the 1970s, backbenchers have been less deferential to the party leadership than in the past. A backbencher rebellion against John Major's EU policy weakened the Prime Minister significantly. Tony Blair faced a major rebellion of Labour backbenchers on key votes in February and March 2003 regarding the use of force in Iraq. After the disastrous 2009 local and European elections, many Labour MPs called for Gordon Brown's resignation, and 5 cabinet members resigned. In an effort to shore up his support, Brown reshuffled his cabinet, giving choice positions to key people in the government and breaking the momentum of the cabinet meltdown that threatened to force him out. The near collapse of the government came on the heels of the exposure of a widespread parliamentary expenses scandal, in which Parliament members charged thousands of pounds worth of expenses to the taxpayers. The scandal questioned the very nature of parliamentary sovereignty, the principle that Parliament's decisions are final, and the government had a great deal to do to restore its image with the public. Parliament has some substantial powers because its members debate and refine potential legislation, are the only ones who may become party leaders and ultimately may head the government, scrutinize the administration of laws, and keep communication lines open between voters and ministers. The House of Lords. Britain is no exception to the rule in its bicameral legislative structure. However, many of the benefits of bicameralism, including the dispersing of powers between 2 houses, do not operate because the House of Lords has so little power. The House of Lords is the only hereditary parliamentary house in existence today, and although historically it was the original parliament, today it has minimal influence. The House of Commons established supremacy during the 17th century, and Lords gradually declined in authority. Since the turn of the 20th century, the only remaining powers are to delay legislation and to debate technicalities of proposed bills. Lords may add amendments to legislation, but the House of Commons may delete their changes by a simple majority vote. Until 2009, the chamber also included 5 law lords, who served as Britain's highest court of appeals, but they could never rule acts of Parliament unconstitutional. Until 1999, about 1/2 of the members of Lords were hereditary peers, who hold seats that have been passed down through family ties over the centuries. The remaining were life peers, people appointed to non-hereditary positions as a result of distinguished service to Britain. In 1999, the Labour government took seats away from most of the hereditary peers, so that today only 92 hereditary seats remain among the 567 life peers. In late 2001, the government announced plans for a new upper house with about 550 mostly appointed members, but with no hereditary posts. In March 2007, the House of Commons voted in principle in favor of replacing the Lords with an elected chamber, either 100% elected or 80% elected, 20% appointed. However, the House of Lords, feeling threatened by the idea of dismantlement, rejected this proposal and voted for an entirely appointed House of Lords. In 2008, Jack Straw, a top cabinet member, introduced a white paper, an announcement of government policy, that proposed to replace the House of Lords with an 80 to 100% elected chamber, with 1/3 being elected at each general election, for a term of 12 to 15 years. The current system continues despite the ongoing debate. One criticism of that British parliamentary system is that the lack of separation between the Prime Minister and the legislature creates a dangerous concentration of power, since both are controlled by the same party. Supporters of the parliamentary system praise its efficiency, since it does not experience the crippling gridlock found between Congress and the President of the United States. The bureaucracy. Britain has hundreds of thousands of civil servants who administer laws and deliver public services. Most civil servants do clerical work and other routine work of a large bureaucracy. However, a few hundred hire civil servants directly advise ministers and oversee work of the departments. They actually coordinate and implement the policies that cabinet members set. The British bureaucracy is a stable and powerful force in the political system. Top-level bureaucrats almost always make a career of government service, and most are experts in their areas. Because the ministers are party leaders chosen by the Prime Minister, they understand a great deal about British politics, but they generally are not experts in a particular policy areas. In contrast, the top bureaucrats usually stay with their particular departments, and the ministers rely on their expertise. As a result, the top civil servants have a great deal of input into policymaking, including discretionary power to make many decisions in implementing legislative and executive decisions. The minister has a powerful position in the cabinet, but she or he relies heavily on the advice of the bureaucrats. Bureaucrats almost never run for public office and are usually not active in party politics. Therefore, as cabinets come and go, the bureaucrats stay and fulfill an important role in government. The judiciary. English ideas about justice have shaped those of many other modern democracies. For example, the concept of trial by jury goes back to the time of Henry II in the 13th century. Britain has had a judicial branch for centuries, but ironically, the modern judiciary has much more limited powers than those in the United States, France, and Germany. In Britain, the principle of parliamentary sovereignty, Parliament's decisions are final, has limited the development of judicial review, the court's ability to decide whether or not actions, laws, and other court decisions are unconstitutional. British courts can only determine whether government decisions violate the common law or previous acts of Parliament. Even then, the courts tend to rule narrowly because they defer to the authority of Parliament. By tradition, the courts may not impose their rulings on Parliament, the Prime Minister, or the Cabinet. The British legal system based on common law contrasts to the stricter code law practiced in the rest of Europe. Code law is much less focused on precedent and interpretation than common law. British courts, like those in most other advanced democracies, do make distinctions between original and appellate jurisdiction. District courts hear cases that may be appealed to the High Courts, which until 2009 were in turn appealed to the highest court in the land, the Law Lords. They were actually members of the House of Lords who were designated as the highest judicial authority in Great Britain to settle disputes from lower courts. In 2009, a Supreme Court was created to replace the Law Lords as the highest judicial authority in the United Kingdom. The court consists of a president and 11 justices appointed by a panel of lawyers. Its chief function is to serve as a final court of appeals on points of law in cases across the country, although Scotland maintains a separate legal system. The British Supreme Court has much more limited powers than its counterpart in the United States. It can nullify government actions if they are judged to exceed powers granted by an Act of Parliament, but it cannot declare an Act of Parliament unconstitutional. Parliament remains the supreme authority under the principle of parliamentary sovereignty. In general, judges have the reputation of being independent, impartial, and neutral. Few have been MPs, and almost none are active in party politics. Judges are appointed on good behavior, but they are expected to retire when they reach the age of 75. Most judges are educated in public schools and at Oxford and Cambridge, and their positions are prestigious.